said, if you're just coming in, because the first session's in Korean. This session's called Investigating North Korea. I'm Keith Richburg. I'm going to be the moderator for today. My job is mainly going to be to get out of the way and let the panelists speak on this really interesting topic. Just a brief introduction about myself. I'm the director of the Journalism Center at the University of Hong Kong. That's just for the last couple of years, but I spent a little over 30 years as a correspondent for the Washington Post. I was based in Asia for most of that time, Beijing and Southeast Asia and Hong Kong twice, and I have been to North Korea twice. First in 1997 on a week-long trip, and then secondly in 2011 from Beijing. But don't consider myself an expert on North Korea, but I have got the opportunity to visit Pyongyang. Nowhere near an expert as our guests. In the order in which they're going to speak, first is going to be Ms. Choi Seon-Young. She is a special correspondent covering North Korea for the Yonhap news agency. She actually worked for 7 years as a journalist in North Korea before defecting to South Korea in 1996. And in 2009, she filed the first stories revealing that Kim Il-sung, the late Kim Il-sung, was going to name Kim Jong-un as his successor. And for that, in 2010, she was awarded the Korean Journalist Association, or the Journalist Association of Korea's Korean Journalist Award. So that's a pretty prestigious award for that big scoop. So she will be our first speaker with a presentation. She will be followed by Martin Weiser. Martin got his, who's from Germany originally, got his MA right here in Seoul. He did his thesis on North Korean human rights policy, and he has been doing analysis into North Korea's legal system, and his work appeared in the European Journal of Korean Studies. All of our speakers here, they have so much on their bio here that I won't bore you reading it all, or we'd be here all day. But Martin's also an expert researcher, and he also has been working here with the Human Rights Commission Office, the UN Human Rights Commission Office, helping them with some legal issues. He'll talk about that a little bit. And finally, but not least, and the one who came the furthest is Jenny Town. And she is well, she's also got a long resume, but at the moment she's the research analyst for the Stimson Center, and she's also the managing editor and producer for 38 North, which is a web journal. And before that, she was with Johns Hopkins SAIS, and she did all kinds of other things. But we're going to first start out with Choi Seon-Young. Are you ready for your presentation? And we're going to get simultaneous translation since she'll be speaking in Korean.
안녕하세요. 연합뉴스 통일외교부에서 일하는 최선영 기자입니다. 이런 자리에서 발표를 할 수 있게 해주셔서 너무 영광으로 생각합니다. 다만 제가 이런 큰 자리에서 발표를 해본 적이 없기 때문에 많이 떨리고 좀 떨립니다. 그리고 불편하게 들리시더라도 좋게 봐주셨으면 감사하겠습니다. 제가 남한에 와서 기자 생활을 한 지 20년이고 연합뉴스에서만 17년 6개월째 일하고 있습니다. 사실 북한 출신이라고 해서 북한을 잘 알고 북한 기사를 쉽게 쓸 수 있다고 생각하시면 큰 오해라고 생각이 됩니다. 북한에서 태어나 고등교육을 받고 30년이 넘도록 살았지만 북한을 잘 안다는 건 참으로 어려운 일이라고 생각합니다. 저도 많은 좌충우돌을 겪으며 여기까지 왔습니다. 그럼에도 여전히 북한에 대한 제대로 된 정보를 알고 분석하기 위해 오버의 함정에 빠지지 않으려고 안간힘을 쓰고 있습니다. 그동안 기자 생활을 하면서 제가 얻은 경험과 교훈이라고 특히 조심해야 할 것들에 대해서 이야기하고 싶습니다. 북한 같은 1인 지배 체제 하에서 웬만한 정보는 거의 다 차단이 되어 있습니다. 당국이 공개하고 발표하는 것 외에는 정보를 알기가 쉽지 않습니다. 북한 고위층이라고 해도 예의가 아닙니다. 북한 체제의 특성상 고급 정보를 공유하는 부류는 매우 제한되어 있고 담당 분야가 아니면 공식적인 입장 외에는 알기 어렵습니다. 예전에 항장엽 북한 노동당 비서조차도 자기가 담당했던 분야 외에는 또 주변 간부들에게서 들은 것 외에는 아는 게 많지 않다고 스스로 말하곤 했습니다. 제가 남한에 와서 보니 북한에 있을 때 들었던 또 믿었던 일들이 사실과 다른 경우도 적지 않았습니다. 그래서 탈북자들이 북한에서 어떻게 먹고 살았다 같은 게 일반 실생활에 대한 증언과 달리 북한 권력과 상층부에 대한 정보는 정말 조심해야 한다고 생각을 합니다. 이런 맥락에서 탈북자들이 현재 북한 주민과 접촉해서 얻는 정보에 대해서도 대단히 조심해야 한다고 생각합니다. 탈북자들에 위한 오보권을 꼽는다면 대표적으로 북한 현송월 3지연합단 단장의 처형 건과 김정은 위원장의 채축훈 중 한 사람인 마원춘 국무위원의 설계국장 사망권입니다. 이 마원춘 설계국장 사망권은 미국의 자유아시아 방송에서 일하는 탈북 기자가 처음 보도했고 이를 미국 매체를 통해 다시 한국에 보도된 상태입니다. 또 일부 언론이 북한 현실을 너무 모른 채 탈북자들의 주장을 신뢰함으로써 사실과 다른 기사가 양산되고 있다는 점에 대해서도 말하지 않을 수 없습니다. 북한에서 어느 대학을 나왔다. 부모 또는 탈북자 본인이 어떤 높은 직책에 있었다. 그래서 그의 주장이 사실이다. 등등 이렇게 엄청난 거물인 양 부풀리거나 발언에 신빙성을 부여하는 기사를 종종 봐왔습니다. 좋은 대학을 나왔다고 해서 노동당원이었다고 해서 간부집 자녀라고 해서 또 어떤 중요한 직위에 있었다고 해서 그의 주장을 그대로 믿으면 안 된다는 점에 대해서 얘기하고 싶습니다. 북한에서의 직책과 직위는 남한과 비교할 때 상당히 다릅니다. 남한의 선호 직업이나 직책이 북한에서는 평범한 경우가 적지 않습니다. 아울러 북한처럼 정보가 차단된 사회에서는 유언 비언이 또한 난무합니다. 더욱이 북한 당국이 내부 강연등을 통해서 또는 유언 비어를 직접 흘리는 경우가 적지 않습니다. 당국 차원에서 민심 관리를 위해서 또 여론 조성을 위해서 일부러 유언 비언을 퍼뜨리고 있는 것입니다. 북한은 명분과 당위성을 만들어서 유언 비어를 유포하는데 아주 뛰어나다고 인식이 되어 있습니다. 사실과 전혀 다름에도 불구하고 사실과 전혀 다름에도 불구하고 탈북자들은 북한에 있을 때 소문으로 또는 주변에서 들은 것이라며 사실이라고 믿고 그것을 기자에게 말하고 기자는 또 그것을 그대로 기사로 다른 경우를 많이 봤습니다. 거기에다 북한 기사의 어버 양산에는 보수 정권과 당시 이 정보기관도 한몫을 하는 것을 직접 경험을 했습니다. 북한에 대한 첩보를 정치적 목적에 활용하기 위해서 사실인 양 공개한 경우가 많았습니다. 가장 가까운 사례가 이영길 북한군 총참모장 처형 어버 기사를 꼽을 수 있습니다. 박근혜 정부 시절인 2018년 2월 당시 정부의 요청에 따라서 언론은 대북 소식통을 내세워서 이영길 군 총참모장이 처형됐다고 일제히 보도했습니다. 정부가 물밑에서 수도로 권유한 기사라 언론들은 확인할 필요조차 느끼지 않고 심지어 분석까지 그대로 받아썼습니다. 당시 개성공단 입주 기업들이 반대를 무시하고 남북 간에 유일하게 남아있던 채널인 개성공단이 문을 닫으면서 이영길 처형 카드를 꺼내 들었다는 것이 일반적인 분석입니다. 북한은 이 이영길 처형 사건, 어보 사건에 대해서 침묵했고 이듬해인 2017년 5월 이영길은 북한 제7차 노동당 대회에서 정치국 후보위원회 이름을 올리면서 깜짝 등장했습니다. 당시 정보기관이 이영길이 처벌에 대한 첩보를 접하고 이후 상황을 확인도 하지 않은 채 개성공단 이슈를 덮기 위해서 서둘러 공개한 것인지 아니면 아예 거짓 첩보를 입수했던 것인지는 알 수 없습니다. 보수 정권의 정보기관에서 대북 정보를 얻는 것은 쉽지 않다고 할 수 있습니다. 남북 관계가 긴장하면 정보 루트가 사라지거나 정보 제공자들이 꼬리를 감추기 있습니다. 반대로 또 북한 정보가 없다 보니 정보 사기꾼들에 의해서 거짓 정보가 만들어지기도 합니다. 그러다 보니 정보기관이 미확인 첩보를 언론과 연결된 루트에 슬쩍 흘려서 기사를 쓰도록 유도하고 그 북한의 반응을 살펴보면서 확인하는 경우도 있습니다. 심지어 정보기관 고위층의 발언이라고 해서 믿고 기사를 썼다가 오보로 확인된 경우를 직접 겪기도 했습니다. 그만큼 북한 뉴스는 오보의 함정에 빠지기 쉽습니다. 문제는 일부 언론들이 북한 관련 기사에 대해서 믿거나 말거나 또는 아무렇게나 써도 된다는 인식을 갖고 있는 것 같다는 게 그동안 제가 생각하고 그동안 기자 생활을 하면서 저는 그런 생각을 많이 갖게 됐습니다. 사실 한국동에서는 개인이나 정부 부처에 대한 기사를 함부로 만들어내기가 어렵습니다. 바로 팩트를 나름 확인해주고 분석도 곁들이고 또 잘못된 기사일 경우 소송도 들어옵니다. 그러나 북한 체제의 특성상 그것을 확인하기 어렵습니다. 확인해주지 않기 때문입니다. 이런 북한 오보의 북한 관련 오보 기사가 생산되는 데는 북한 당국이 1차적인 책임, 원죄가 있겠다고 말할 수 있습니다. 그래서인지 일부 언론은 북한 기사만큼은 팩트가 별로 중요하지 않은 것 같다고 생각하는 것 같고 북한 관련 기사를 보면 아닌 것 같다는 생각을 종종 하게 됩니다. 그냥 탈북자나 그 누가 주장을 하면 그대로 사실처럼 받아들이고 거기에 기자의 견해를 깨맞추는 식으로 기사가 많이 양산되는 것을 봐왔습니다. 코트 저널리즘이 피해일 수도 있겠지만 어쨌든 북한 관련 기사를 너무 쉽게 대하는 그 이유도 있다는 생각을 하고 있습니다. 저는 북한 뉴스에서는 믿거나 말거나가 아닌 또 한두 마디 듣고 쓰는 게 아닌 확인 또 확인 그런 자세가 매우 중요하다고 생각합니다. 특정 단독 욕심에 눈이 멀어서 또 북한은 나쁜 국가여서 함부로 다뤄도 된다는 입장이 아니라면 이 같은 자세만이 확인 또 하는 그런 자세만이 북한 기사를 제대로 쓸 수 있는 기초라고 생각합니다. 북한 관련 소식통을 어떻게 만들고 어떻게 관리하는지 그리고 신뢰를 구축하고 거짓 정보와 팩트를 확인하는 노하우가 특별히 있는지 잘 모르겠습니다. 제 경험상은 특정에 대한 욕심을 내려놓고 확인 또 확인한다는 그런 자세가 제일 중요하다고 생각을 합니다. 제가 동료 기자와 1년 넘게 품들인 기사 중에 하나를 꼽자면 김정은 국무위원장의 부친인 김정일 국방위원장의 네 번째 부인 김옥 관련 기사입니다. 사실 이 기사를 처음 서수로부터 접하고 서수로부터 여러 가지 김옥 김정일과 관련한 여러 가지 정보를 입수했는데 믿기지 않은 내용들이 적지 않게 포함되어 있었습니다. 동료 기자의 서스로부터도 김옥의 존재를 재확인했습니다. 그러나 좀 더 사실 확인이 필요했습니다. 더욱이 인물에 대한 거라 사진이 필요했습니다. 그러나 김옥의 부인 김옥의 부인 네 번째 부인이 김옥이고 김옥이 김정일과 함께 국정 운영에 깊숙이 관여한다는 내용 외에는 사실 더 구체적인 보도할 만한 내용이 많지 않았습니다. 다만 김정일이 주요한 외교 정책과 대외 행보에 등장했었다는 이런 점에 주목을 했습니다. 그래서 친분 있는 모 방송 기자를 통해서 필요한 남북 정상이 참가한 남북 행사와 북미 간 접촉 영상 등을 다 뒤졌고 사진 역시 모조리 찾아봤습니다. 비슷한 인물로 추정이 돼도 정말 같은 인물인지 사실 확인하는 과정에 또 시간이 걸렸습니다. 결국 1년 넘는 시간을 거쳐서 사진과 기사를 확인하고 선고할 수 있었습니다. 이후 김정일과 김옥의 동반 중국 방문 영상도 공개되면서 주목을 받았습니다. 북한 전문 기자를 오래 하다 보면 솔직히 다양한 분야의 사람들을 알게 되고 여러 정보에도 접하는데 거기서 팩트를 걸러내는 것은 올것이 기자의 몫입니다. 제 입장에서는 가장 중요한 것은 정보 제공자의 정보 제공의 의도라고 생각합니다. 왜 이런 정보를 기자에게 제공했을까? 이런 생각을 하지 않을 수 없습니다. 왜냐하면 아무리 믿었던 소스라도 언제 사심이 개입돼서 사심으로 돌변해서 부정적 정보를 제공할지 모르기 때문입니다. 지난 기자 생활을 하면서 이런 걸 적지 않게 경험을 했습니다. 또 소스에 대한 신뢰와 정보의 가치에도 불구하고 서둘지 말고 무조건 2중, 3중으로 확인이 필요하다고 생각합니다. 시간이 걸리더라도 팩트 확인에 대한 기자의 집념이 무엇보다 중요하다고 생각합니다. 사실 그런 입장에서 그런 집념을 갖고 기사를 썼음에도 오버하는 경우도 몇 번 있었습니다. 또 정보 소스에만 의존하면 안 된다는 생각입니다. 전문 기자로의 전문성도 필요합니다. 소스의 정보나 첩보를 분석하려면 전문가적인 시각과 분석이 반드시 동반해야 합니다. 소스의 해석이나 분석을 참고는 해도 그대로 받아들이는 걸 경계합니다. 소스의 사적 의도가 있을 수 있기 때문입니다. 그래서 전문가적인 판단이 대단히 필요하고 그래서 전문 기자가 필요하다고도 생각을 합니다. 김정은 후계자 내정을 세계 최초 보도할 수 있었던 것도 오랜 기간 저와 동료 기자 모두 각자의 여러 소스들을 관리하고 깊이 신뢰를 형성하는 과정이 있었기 때문입니다. 당시 김정은 후계자 최초 보도하던 시점이 이명박 정부였는데 이명박 정부의 정보기관도 전혀 짐작조차 못하고 있었습니다. 그러나 우리는 저와 동료 기자는 10년 넘게 갈고 닦은 정보력과 정보 관리에 의한 정보력과 또 전문가적인 판단으로 확인을 거쳐서 기사를 내보낼 수 있었습니다. 기사가 나간 다음에도 한국 정보기관하고 많은 정부 부처들에서 사실이 아니라고 보도했지만 결국 시간이 걸렸고 한국 기자협회 대상도 그래서 보도 이후 2년이 지난 다시 말해서 김정은 국무위원장이 북한 TV에 김정은 후계자로 공식 데뷔한 이후에야 사실상 확인이 돼 한국기자협회 대상을 받을 수 있었습니다. 이상입니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for that, Seon-Young, and thank you very much for the simultaneous translation there.
2016년. 2016년. 아까 제가 그 이영길 인민군 청참모장 처용에 대해서 처용 사건이 있었던 게 2016년이라고 2016년인데 18년이라고 잘못 말씀드렸습니다. 2016년 개성공단 그 완전히 문을 닫으면서 그 닫는다고 발표한 그 날에 이 이영길 처용 사건을 정보기관을 통해서 언론에 보도됐습니다. 그리고 이듬해 2017년 5월에 기영길이 북한 정치부 후보위원으로 이름을 올리면서 대형 어부 사건으로 남게 되었던 것입니다. 이상입니다.
Great. Thank you for that clarification. That's really very interesting presentation. We learned about how even though North Korea is a closed place, we as journalists still have to do our due diligence. We still have to do our verification. We still have to do our fact checking. Really interesting. Thank you for that. Next, we're going to hear from Martin, who's got a short presentation with some slides. He's going to talk about digging into the documents, and he's going to talk a little bit about his work and his research. Martin Weiser.
옆으로 앉아 계시면 되고.
Yeah, just sit on the end.
옆에 앉아 계시면 돼요. 여기 앉으세요.
Okay, so actually I'm not a journalist, so I'm more a researcher, and because I had lots of time the last 4 years after graduating in Seoul, I was very interested in what we can know about North Korea, about all these possibilities. You can talk to defectors, you can use satellite images, but you can also look at North Korean materials. And surprisingly, not many people are doing that in the extent they could. Everyone is looking at North Korean media, what Kim Jong-il or Kim Jong-in says, and even like official documents like laws, but they don't do it like in their completeness, for example. So they don't want to spend all the time. And if you read the introduction to this panel, so North Korea is very isolated, so we have not lots of materials. They are Stalinist, so it's basically all propaganda. And in the end, everything is controlled. So that's what the introduction says. And I hope to show you that actually that's not true. So so you're a journalist, I'm a researcher, and even if that's 99% true, we are more interested in these 1%, in these small contradictions of the general narrative, basically. And these are just 4 different sources so you can use, and which are also most of the stuff I look at. So leadership texts, of course, there's 3 Kims in North Korea, then the media, just newspapers, websites, all these things. And institutions, because that if you look at things like institutions, just means they are complex, they're different policies, they have interests and people. And official documents, that's more because I also look at numbers, quantitative changes, so that's something you can very easily do with official documents. So because I have not much time, let's just go to the first example. So these leadership texts, so they come out as selected collections. Now they're mostly complete collections for Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il. And the most recent one was volume number 3, and it covers 1974. And Kim Jong-il just was getting into a position of power, and that's getting interesting because they released new texts about things he said, he ordered, he did, and then you can a little bit better understand what was actually going on, because even there's lots of propaganda in there. They're edited, they're filtered. They still shows a real picture what actually was going on the leadership level. So in the end, that's actually something we can investigate. And like one example, that's why I'm more interested in the contradictions in these speeches and texts. So last year, North Korea submitted, or they submitted it before, I guess, a report to the Convention Against Discrimination of Women. So they had a state report, they got questions, they had to defend themselves, and then they had to reply to the questions. And they uploaded this PDF file, and when they were asked about Songbon, so Songbon is basically means social class or constituent. So if you're a worker, what army or farmer or something like that, and they just responded, there is no such thing. And that's it's a very North Korean response, deny everything. It's just propaganda from the US or whatever, hostile forces. But the problem is, if you look at the leadership text, they keep talking about Songbon, social class, all the time. So actually, as a journalist, you already could say, but Kim Jong-il himself says you are discriminating. You shouldn't do that. So why do you say you don't have the system? Because even Kim Jong-il, he's very explicit saying, so you should discriminate people who are from the South. So that's not good. Just on their social class of coming from the South, because that's a special category. And he also says, so problem is, if you only look at social class, maybe someone with a social class is a bad person, someone with a bad social class is a good person. So it's just very, in the end, it's very complex. So they have a whole system, and this social classification they deny actually is a big, important part of it. So surprisingly, no one really wants to confront North Koreans with these contradictions, and that's one thing I'm working on. Then the second thing is North Korean media. So many people talk about what's in the Nodong Sinmun, the party newspaper, and all these things, and it's getting a lot more easier to access all these things. So we have a big database for universities mostly, where you can search very easily 300,000 texts from the last about 10 years. Then you have the KCNA archive online, you can search it, or NK News has a big database. And the one example I give you is, it shows that it's very chaotic. So you have writers, editors, translators, lots of people involved, and sometimes they don't know what they're doing. So professionally, they are not really good in their job, but they also don't know which guidelines to follow. And there's one example is of a US case where LGBT and Hispanic NGOs, they complained against the Liberman Broadcasting, some talk show, and they filed an official complaint, which is, you can read about that probably anywhere in the West or even in Asia, but why in North Korean state media? So that's just very surprising, especially they never mention gay or lesbians. If you look at that at the bottom and read, so the talk show was against women, gay and lesbian minorities, and you never find North Korea basically complaining about the US discriminating sexual minorities because they don't talk about sexual minorities. And then, but if you can speak Korean or read Korean on the right side, so that's a Korean text, and it says, this talk show talks bad about women and ethnic minorities. So you can already see they changed the text, and apparently whoever wrote the English text and the Korean text, they have different guidelines, or they don't get checked the same way. And then you already can see, so that's one example, but translations usually are really bad, so there are all kind of chaotic things you can find in official media, even like state media. And then you can do any stories with that you want. And then for institutions, so I think it's very important because they're another access point. So we all know about Kim Jong-un, the Workers' Party. Some people even talk about the parliament. But so that's the big institutions, they're important, but what about the smaller ones? So they have a Federation for the Disabled, they have satellite parties, two even, and they have, like religious institutions, environmentalists, so just a broad range of diverse people, but we don't really hear of them. But for at least these three institutions, we have some information. So like the Korea Social Democratic Party, they have a party magazine which they even translate into English, and they send that out, for example, to Germany, because they have a strong social democratic party and they wanted to get closest, so they sent them their propaganda material, basically. And yeah, one thing that's in this propaganda material, and they don't really talk about that much, they have lots of Christian members. In 1980s, that was like 13%. And that basically means every Christian family has one member in this party. So it's basically kind of a Christian lobby group for North Koreans. And then that's what I found when I read the magazine. So like, we know from other socialist countries like China and East Germany that those satellite parties got a lot more active in the 1980s. So there was perestroika, so more, at least they could voice demands for reform, more openness, more consumer goods, all these things. And surprisingly, something similar happened also in North Korea. So suddenly, in the 1980s, they were talking about human rights, even twice. And usually they don't do that. And then one writer for that magazine that was with them for about a decade, he said, our party can be called the party of human rights. So that itself is very surprising. The party has human rights in their party platform, which has only 10 points, so it's a very important point. But what does it make with the other North Korean parties, like the ruling party? Apparently they are not the party of human rights, if you try to read it that. And then they keep mentioning all these things, so we should go to the people, see the real human rights situation, get complaints, and try to help them to have their problems solved when they have problems with institutions, like, for example, police, which is a big problem in North Korea. And also, they were, the magazine encouraged party members to adopt political, legal, and social measures, so they should just pull their whole energy into trying to make human rights violations less or completely make them go away, what North Koreans always argue. So that's a very important thing. I found that 4 years ago. I wrote a piece 3 years ago, but surprisingly, even in South Korea, no one wants to talk about these things. And then, so that's the last point, and actually 2 stories I want to share with you. So actually I didn't help the UN Office for Human Rights, Seoul Office for Human Rights with legal issues. I helped them understand the North Korean legal system. So I spent like 4 years collecting every information on the legal changes which came up, and I came up with a list of 4,000 texts. So we don't have access to all of them, but at least like the title, dates, and they also have numbers. So basically every document is numbered. It's cabinet decision number 1, parliamentary law number 3,800, or however, whatever numbers you find. And you can just map them out by number and date. So you can see how many we know which are not released, where only the titles know. And like for this, so basically you see 3 lines. And it's orders of the Supreme Commander, so a military position. And they are always occupied by the Kim family. So at the right you see the orders given by Kim Jong-in. But the problem is with Kim Jong-il. So from the 1990s, he was the Supreme Commander, and he should have only 1 line. So because he was the only person there, so the number should just go up. But we can see he has 2 lines. So somewhere between April 2005 and April 2006, apparently they reset the number, and we don't know why. Could be completely unimportant, just like an administrative step. But if you so there's some people in the intelligence, or even a German professor, they say around 2006 something happened. So like they withdrew from economic reform. Then some people argue, Kim Jong-il was pushing that, so apparently he was not strong enough to do that, and he had to allow hardliners to impose their policies. And if we look at that, so apparently he also had to reset the numbering of the Supreme Commander. You know, I'm coming from a parliamentary system. We have a prime minister, so the prime minister actually can say, I want this policy, and I know you don't agree, but if you want basically that I stay on top and you don't have any problems with leadership, then you have to agree to this policy. And in Germany they can do, I put myself to vote with this policy, and if you say yes, you get me and the policy. If you say no, I'm going to, and then you have to figure out things alone. And so it's probably not going to have happened that way in Korea, in North Korea, but it's at least a thing how we can comprehend what might have happened. So if shortly after we had a nuclear test, and at least Kim Il-sung was very clear he doesn't look like nuclear weapons that much. So he wants a nuclear-free peninsula, and then maybe Kim Jong-un had to convince people that he needs nuclear weapons to have the US agree to peace treaty and all these things, and then to get rid of nuclear weapons again. So that might explain why he had to reset the numbers, because basically he was re-elected as a supreme commander. And then the next one is very simple. You probably, if someone went to North Korea, you get a visa, and usually you also get a visa number. So you can see that at the top right, the first number basically is the last digit of the year, so that's 2017. Then you have a code for a category. I don't even know what code that might point to, that code. But in the end, you always have like 5 digits, and that's just numbers that go up and up. So you basically can say that year in that category, that so many tourists got a visa. So we don't know if they went in the end or if it was the same person, but we know, okay, they have these amounts of visas. So you just can take a number and then try to calculate. And especially for visas, many people, like tourists, are proud to go to North Korea, so they put up all their personal information, you know, name, birth name. So maybe you shouldn't do that, even, you know, with the pictures. But like the numbers are all online, so I searched, maybe I found like 50. So, and then if you get someone in a tourist company to just share the numbers with you, so you can't know who went, so it's basically anonymous. And then you have like a big data set and to really see how tourism develops in North Korea. So that's also like something really simple, but still investigative. So that's something we could do. And then the last thing is passports. So I just blanked out all the personal information because it was online with everything to see for everybody. But so that's actually 2 North Korean passports from workers, 2 female workers in Nepal, restaurant workers. And we know North Korea has lots of workers abroad. They apparently all need a passport, but they also have passport numbers. So those numbers might be given when they get the passport first or every time they're extended. But if you look at the numbers, it's basically the same except for the last 4. So then you can look at the dates again. So the first passport was, I think, August 30, and then was September 11. So you have like 2 weeks. And according to these numbers, like 1,100 people got a passport. So you can like measure basically like, even North Korean tourism abroad or like worker movements, all these kind of things. So you don't know where they go, but at least you have got like a basic number you can work with. That's also the last slide. I don't know how much time I have. But so basically my point is why I'm rushing through this. So there's lots of material out there. It's not, North Korea is isolated, but even like in Seoul you can read a lot. Washington DC has a good library. Even in Germany, China, Japan, you probably have lots of material. Then you're probably gonna think, but I can't speak Korean, so I can't do it. But most of this, or like lots of the stuff is in English too. Like this party magazine, all in English. The leadership speeches, they're all in English. And you probably, if you don't have it like close to you, you can call the closest North Korean embassy, and I'm sure they're gonna help you read this stuff. Because so I went to a North Korean embassy, and they're sometimes very open. Actually, the guy I talked to, he loved football and beer, and that's why he wanted to go to Germany and up at the embassy. And he just told me, so it's very nice, North Korean law, and you talk about human rights and these things, but so what do we have from that? I told him, okay, I want this database, and actually I could put all the Kim Il-sung writings up there. So because right now everyone has to read it in paper, it's not making sense to read 2,000 pages if you're only interested in one topic. So it's lots of wasted time. And he told me that's actually something, I could help you with. So because they also want you to read it, and the easier it's get, the more people are going to read it. Now, sadly, he had to go back to Pyongyang. His email got deleted, so I have no way to contact him anymore. But so they are interested in just talking about these things, communicating. And like I said, there are many contradictions where they contradict themselves, where they have no idea what they are talking about. Like other gay people in Korea, they say no, but apparently, there are always minorities everywhere. And so you just have to point to these things and ask them. So if Kim Jong-il says that, why do you disagree? And they can't disagree, so they have to think about another response. And then someday, Kim Jong-il is criticizing human rights violations inside North Korea, so why can't we talk about these things? And then one day you can have an actual discussion with North Korea, and I hope then, people are gonna change and things gonna change too. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Martin. And Jenny Town is very familiar with this very hard to understand capital with a crazy, unpredictable leader with nuclear weapons. I mean, Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And and she is here. I think she's basically in about 3 o'clock in the morning, but she's going to follow up and tell us what she can or how you follow North Korea from Washington, as she does now with Stimson and also 38 North.
Great, thank you. I have to say, it's rare, but I agree with both of the speakers before me. And I think they all brought up some very good methodological points. North Korea is one of these countries where, because it's difficult to try and get information, it's difficult to know, people don't really try. And it is a country where information is knowable, but you have to try. And not enough people believe that, and so then you get a lot of copycat reporting. One rumor starts, people report the rumor spreads, and the next thing you know, the situation has gone out of control. So I think I just want to offer a few tips more than anything, and if there's more substantive stuff you want to talk about in discussion, I'm happy to do so. But as a researcher, again, I'm not a reporter, I'm not a journalist, but I do, through 38 North, we do a lot of media outreach, specifically to try and provide more information and to provide access to resources to help journalists better understand where to find information about North Korea, how to find information about North Korea, and how to think about North Korea in a more responsible way. And so some of the tips that I have, for instance, is one is really build a network of reliable sources. So not everyone's going to go to the archives and go to the original sources. You might not have time. Certainly, journalism is really built on deadlines and editorial preferences, and there's all these constraints that you have. So you're not going to have time to do all the research. But if you start to learn who the researchers are who would know these things, so that you know who to call, sort of where to direct your resources when you do have that time, building those networks is incredibly important, especially if you don't have expertise in this area, in the subject area. And these days, North Korea is such a popular topic that most reporters have to deal with it on some level, whether they know anything or not. And so, this is really the first thing, is really build your network of reliable sources. And it might be people like Martin who have been doing this research, that have worked with primary sources, that do talk to North Koreans, as well as, if you can get inside sources, if you can get North Korean sources too, that's great. But really, again, knowing who's working on this in a methodical, responsible way. I think the biggest thing, and Mrs. Choi sort of hit on this before, is really just to question everything. It's too easy to believe whatever you hear about North Korea, and it's too easy to think information that supporting information and corroboration isn't possible, and so you just sort of go with whatever you hear as good enough. But instead, you really should be questioning everything. How are you getting this information? How, if you did get a tip about North Korea, for instance, how did this person get that information? Did they really have the access to the original source? Like, would they really have known this information to begin with, or did they hear it from someone else, and who did they hear it from, and try and follow that chain? You know, when it comes to defectors, especially, this is you know, an imperfect source of information, and a lot of times people do think that if you're a North Korean defector, you know everything about North Korea, so I can ask you anything. And a lot of defectors, you know, will offer you some answers, just like experts in different fields will offer you answers. It doesn't necessarily mean that they knew or had access to that information when they were in North Korea, or even now outside of North Korea. So you do have to sort of question the veracity of your sources. And really the key question is, how do they know this? Similarly, in the inside sources, again, Mrs. Choi really touched on this too. If you have North Korean sources, or if you are reading things like Daily NK that tries to get information from North Korea out into the public, again, you still should be questioning the value of this information. So these are pinpoints of information that may or may not show larger trends. But you do have to question, why would this person give this information out? What agenda might they have? You know, how representative is this pinpoint of information, or is it really just a pinpoint? You know, can you find other information out there from other sources that would sort of corroborate this? And again, there are other sources out there, and there are ways to sort of pick apart these pinpoints of information when you can get them. And oftentimes, if you can't get more, it's probably not something worth reporting on at that given time. It might be something that's of interest that you can mark for later to see if you can get more information later down in the road. I think another thing is really to, I can't read my handwriting. Expertise in one area doesn't necessarily mean they understand the situation at hand. And so you find this a lot. I work a lot on security issues and non-proliferation issues. You find this a lot of non-proliferation experts will talk about North Korea without knowing a lot of context about the geopolitical sensitivities of North Korea, without knowing US DPRK diplomatic history, or knowing only a very cursory history. But they're certainly willing to comment on it. They're certainly willing to talk about sort of the failures, because we're not in the right place now, so certainly we failed in the past, as sort of a blanket comment without the contextual knowledge that's needed to really understand the ebbs and flows and the highs and lows of that diplomatic process. So really, you know, understanding that, you know, just because they're an expert from, you know, a prestigious think tank in DC and they've worked on similar issues does not make them the best expert for this particular issue. And I think one thing we see a lot of in Washington, for instance, in American press is, you know, there are very few people that have this level of expertise on North Korea. It's not a popular research area. And so you have a lot of people that work on like China issues, Japan issues, or broader, you know, security issues that that see North Korea through that lens. So it's not about North Korea itself. It's really about, you know, what China thinks of it, what Japan thinks of it, what this means in terms of U.S.-China strategic competition. And so when they're offering their expert views on this, their expertise is not on North Korea. Their expertise is on these other issues. And oftentimes, because they're of prestigious, you know, academic status, people give too much credence to what they say on the Korea-specific stuff, which is always, you know, one of the problems is that there are so few people, and we know that in the media you like to make sure that you have a variety of voices and you're not going back to the same 5 people every time. But on specialty issues, you are going to find that you will have better information and better reporting if you do find the people, as few as they are, that really focus on this issue and can give you more of that nuance. I think, you know, what Martin was talking about, primary sources are really important. too much reporting relies on reporting of reporting. So if KCNA wrote something and CNN has reported on what KCNA said, and then you get all of this American reporting that's based on the CNN article, but if the CNN article misreported or misinterpreted what that KCNA article said, then all of a sudden you're playing telephone, and so you lose that accuracy over time. So this is one of those areas where if you are working on a story about North Korea that is based on a KCNA statement or a foreign ministry statement or a Rodong Shinmun article, it's always best to go back to that article and read it for yourself to make sure that what has been, so that you have an accurate understanding of what was actually said. And oftentimes too, Rodong Shinmun doesn't always, translate everything from Korean to English, or as Martin pointed out, there's oftentimes where there are discrepancies between how it's been translated in English and what it actually says in Korean. And so on super sensitive issues, you really should be trying to look at the original Korean text as well to get a better understanding and a more accurate understanding of what was actually said, what were they trying to say, even if it wasn't translated in the most accurate way. And then I think one of the big things too is to really always question methodology. So again, now North Korea is a very popular topic. There's a lot of think tanks, there's a lot of research, academic research being done about it. Some of it is more responsible than others, but there's a really famous case of, I think it was CSIS had done a report a couple years ago that was a survey of 30 North Koreans. And then they had drawn, they did some polling of these 30 North Koreans and then drew some conclusions based on this sample. And the question is one, is 30 North Koreans really representative of anything? Who are these 30 North Koreans? How were they chosen? Was the survey in Korean? Was it in English? Was it, North Koreans in China? Was it North Koreans in North Korea? Was it North Koreans in Pyongyang? Was it North Koreans on the border areas? All of these factors matter. But when this survey came out, a lot of the reporting was like, wow, look, here we have polling data from North Korea, and look at the conclusions that we drew from this. And it's like, why would you draw any conclusions from that? Why would you take that seriously? Because there's not enough questioning of how they got that information to make it, to be able to draw valid conclusions from it. So, I think your job as journalists is always to really question the methodology, question the sources, try and get to the primary sources as much as possible, and then go out and find those experts that can help you better understand. Even if you think you got this story right, running it past someone who works on these issues, like for instance, a lot of our experts on 38 North who have had experience working with North Koreans in North Korea, have had long history of working on this issue. We're happy to offer some insights as to is this the right angle? Is this really what was meant in that process? And try and help bring some nuance to that understanding. I think with that, I'll leave it there, so we have time for discussion.
Thank you very much, Jenny. And can I invite the other two panelists to come up to the front, then we'll take some questions. And while they're coming up here, I'll just add as a longtime journalist who's gone in there twice, the question always comes up, is it worth journalists taking those kind of trips, those short trips into North Korea where you're going to be watched and guided all the time? Some places I know like AFP and AP have sort of part-time bureaus based in North Korea. Some people say those bureaus are not worth having there because you're so controlled. My personal opinion is, yeah, it's worth going in, even if it's for a short trip and you're controlled, because seeing the place is better than not seeing it. And even though I was, watched and controlled and couldn't do too much independently, it was still valuable in some ways, as long as you recognize that what you're getting is a limited view. But for example, I was always told that North Koreans won't talk to you and they'll run away from you if you're a foreigner. And I actually found it the complete opposite. They were, I was standing there taking photographs in the morning as people were walking to work, and they were smiling and waving at me. So, they just changed my perception completely. So if you have a chance to take any of those kind of guided trips in, take it, for what it's worth. Recognize that you're not going to get a good reporting trip out of it, but it is valuable for opening your eyes. With that, I think you had a question there. Please come to the mic. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Daniel Hurst. I'm a freelance journalist based in Tokyo. I just wanted to follow on from something you said, Jenny, and also you, Martin, about media, North Korean media. KCNA is often described as externally focused for international consumption. Can you tell us a bit about how we should assess, as journalists, how we should assess the relative significance of which media it is in North Korea saying these things? And when there are those mistranslations in English, is it just bad translation, or is the English version what they want us to hear? Thank you.
Who wants to go first? Martin.
Maybe. Yeah, so actually I wrote a little bit about that. So the problem is that North Korea is very isolated, so most of the translators are not good. So they have no possibility to practice, so that's one issue. And then there are always, it might even be that they have foreign translators. So there's one case where there's a guy sitting in Beijing, and he has to correct all the speeches of the leadership they translate. And I know from another German person, he was there in the late 1980s, and he had to correct all the daily news too. So he was there for leadership speeches, but he had to help them with just daily business too. So it might even be foreigners who just use unique words or something, so we can't even be sure it's the North Koreans that produce these texts. So we have, in the end, we have no idea. So we really have to be careful what interpretations to apply if just the English text gives us another message than the Korean one.
Jenny, any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think there's times where sometimes their foreign vocabulary is limited. Sometimes it does matter who's translating, because if they don't have expertise in that particular subject, they might not know the right vocabulary and they try and figure it out. But yeah, I think KCNA is really much more kind of foreign audience oriented. Rodong Shinmun is much more kind of domestic party line. But these days, I think those lines are getting a little bit blurred. Like there's more media popping up, there's more media options, there's more information in general that's available where it's not so strictly defined anymore. But it is good to try and cross-reference as much as possible. It's good to try and read as much as possible and access, all of those different types, even if it is like the propaganda site, like Uri Minjokuri, like what are they trying to say, what kinds of messages, and if they're sending it on official media versus the like Uri Minjokuri, that matters too, of like, these are the things they want you to pay attention to, but it's not coming officially from, the government, but they want you to know it anyway.
Thank you. Who else has a question here? I'm looking around. I'm going to ask one. I don't see any hands yet in the back, but I'm going to, while you're thinking of your question, I'm going to ask one for Choi Seon-Young. Choi Seon-Young, can I ask you, at the end of your talk, you kind of put out a breadcrumb of interest there that you didn't finish. You said you learned the hard way that sometimes informants or people who give you information may not always be accurate. I was just curious if you might want to share any incident where you maybe got some information from a source and it turned out to be inaccurate.
밝혀야 되나?
Not the name, but
사소하게는 제가 초기에 기자 생활 초기에 보수 조건과 연결된 인사와 학자 소설을 통해서 대형 오보를 한 번 냈습니다. 그래서 북한의 김재경 부부장이라고 사망했다고. 그래서 근데 그 전에 그 사람 단전적으로 쓴 게 아니라 그 전에 그쪽하고 그냥 정보 교류를 하면서 이러저러한 정보를 그 확인을 하던 차인데 그게 있어서 그것도 사실 뭐 확인하려고 했는데 어쨌든 이게 버스 쪽에서 상당히 그 뭐지 그 의도적인 그게 아니었던가 생각을 하게 됩니다. 왜냐하면 그 당시 그 호주 쪽인가 거기서도 북한 관련 그 잘 기억이 안 나는데 그 북한 관련 대응 누가 망명했다는 기사가 한번 여러 번 난 적이 있습니다. 호주 쪽에서 호주 언론에서 그 서스하고 연결된 그 서스를 아니 그 어버를 호주에다 흘린 그 사람인데 그게 당시 한국도 그렇고 그 외국 언론에서 상당히 사실로 팩트로 해서 확인을 했는데 사실은 몇 년 지나서 그게 전혀 사실이 아닌 게 확인이 됐고요. 그러니까 그런 외국 언론이 이렇게 엄청난 신뢰해서 받았던 그 소스 제공자가 저희한테 제공한 거기 때문에 저희도 그걸 믿고 받았는데 사실이 아닌 게 바로 확인이 돼서 그 다음부터는 그때까지만 해도 사실 너무 소스 의존도가 높았는데 그 사건을 계기로 정말 기사 하나 처리하는데 10번, 20번 고민하고 확인하고 그렇게 쓰는 게 쓰게 됐습니다.
Thank you for sharing.
몇번 있는데 그냥 뭐 다 사소한 거 때문에 어차피 북한 정보라는 게 크고 작은 게 팩트에서 좀 작은 부분이지 하지만 조금 달라지기도 하고 다르기도 하고 그래서 제가 그냥 기자생활에서 가장 큰 어점인 거는 그거라고 생각을 합니다. 그리고 보수 정권의 정보기관 수장, 정보기관 거의층에서 나온 얘기를 쓴 얘기도 있는데 그거는 아직은 제가 뭐라고 하기가 그래서 언급하기.
Thank you very much for that. A question here in the front. Can you shout?
Yeah. I think they need the microphone now for the translator.
Ah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I had a question for Mrs. Choi about being a journalist in North Korea and then becoming a journalist in South Korea. What were the biggest differences and similarities, and what surprised you the most? And did you consider not becoming a journalist when you moved to South Korea?
소소하게 차이점은 많고 가장 큰 차이는 북한은 그 노동당의 이렇게 북한에서 언론은 노동당의 선전선동 기구라는 겁니다. 근데 이건 뭐 북한을 비난하기 위해서 하는 얘기 아니라 북한도 그 조선중앙통신 노동신문 그래서 모든 그 언론 매체가 노동당의 선전선동 역할을 해야 한다고 공식적으로 언급하고 또 대학에서도 이후에도 쭉 그렇게 가르치고 있고 그래서 노동당의 정책과 또 의도를 선전하는 역할이지 노동당의 정책을 뭐 비판하거나 이런 거는 하지 않습니다. 그러니까 이렇게 정권을 견제하는 그런 역할이 아니라 선전도구 나팔수로서 역할을 하고 있다는 점에서 차이가 있죠. 비판이나 뭐 최근에는 어느 개인 뭐 이런 개별적 간부들이나 뭐 사람들이 그 잘못된 현황을 조금씩 아주 드물게 비판은 하지만 그것도 개인 그 밑에 아래 사람들이 잘못이지 그게 노동당의 정책이나 최고 지도부의 뭐 이렇게 비판을 하지 않는 그런 점에서 차이가 있습니다. 한국은 국민들에게 알 권리 차원에서 또 정부의 잘못된 정책을 비판하고 견제하는 이런 역할을 하고 있는데 그런 점에서 많이 차이가 난다는 생각을 하고 있고 사실 제가 한국에 와서 기자 할 거라고는 전혀 생각을 못했습니다. 저쪽에서 기자를 하긴 했지만 한국에 와서 이게 북한에 있을 때는 좀 서방 기자는 이렇게 보통 자본주의 기자는 다 서방 기자 이러고 서방 기자는 뭐 좀 뭐라고 이렇게 그 뭔가 찾아다니면서 발굴하고 찾아내고 이런 의미가 많기 때문에 좀 두려움이 컸고 사실 시작은 뭔가 직업을 갖고 살아야 되기 때문에 시작을 해서 맨 처음에 권유를 받았을 때도 해야 될지 말아야 될지 엄청 두려움이 컸고 주변 사람들이 더 여기까지 오게 됐습니다.
Thank you for that. Yep, in the back there, hand up, standing. Yeah, come to the microphone, please.
My name is Banner. I personally running a YouTube channel focusing on news about North Korea. I have worked for a Korean government company in early 1990s, just after the war between the West Germany and East Germany collapsed. I was in Czechoslovakia even before the Korean embassy was there, and I could mix up with the people there. And one thing important was, interesting was, that there was some, so-called daily bulletin in English. So, kind of newspaper in English, and we could get the economic news or other newses. But I felt it's a little bit not detailed, and we are missing some nuance, which the one speaker pointed out today. Therefore, I think the relying on 노동신문 only is not enough to catch the details or the nuance of the North Korean society. One example, I got my feet injured in Prague, and I visited the local hospital there, and the facility of the hospital was very nice, and doctor was very good, and I could heal my wounded part, and they charged me. It's not expensive, but when I showed the bill, the local person said, my neighbor said, it's very expensive. That was one thing I learned, and the other thing is, foreigners can freely visit the good facility hospitals, but the local people, if they want to get really good medical treatment, they should give a bribe. That was what I didn't know. So this is kind of example. So in North Korea also there might be some delicate things or nuance which even South Koreans and furthermore foreigners will miss. Therefore, I think the journalists need to develop some good source to catch or grasp the missing, information, which cannot be given simply from 노동신문 or North Korean government sources. This is my opinion.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. Do we have any other questions? We have about a minute or two left before we're supposed to break at 4:30. Actually, I'm going to let it go a minute or two longer because we started a minute or two late. Does anybody have any questions? Any final questions? Or I will just ask, yes, one final question here.
Hi, I'm Neil Jones from the newspaper. So I asked wonder about nowadays President Moon and with Jong Kim is so in Korean, please. 지금 현재 이렇게 되게 좋아지고 있는 분위기가 그 어떤 지금 북한의 정보를 얻는 분야인지 어떤 기사화시키는 데 있어서 조금 더 뭔가 편해졌거나 아니면 뭐 그런 부분들이 지금 생겨나고 있는지 부분에 대해서 조금 말씀을 해주시면 감사하겠고요. 그다음에 이제 제 최선영 선생님께 좀 질문하고 싶은 게 지금 이제 조그만 이슈긴 한데 김정은 지도자가 이제 시민들한테 인사를 하는 사진이 이제 돌면서 사람들이 되게 조금 놀란 부분이 있다라고 하는데 그거에 대한 개인적인 감정이라든지 그걸 좀 여쭤보고 싶습니다.
So, Choi Seon-Young, the question about the photo. And then we'll get to the predictions of the future from our other two.
허리를 굽혀서 인사한 것은 사실 이번이 처음이 아닙니다. 신년 그리고 노병대에서 이미 최대한 허리를 굽혀서 인사를 했습니다. 근데 그때는 솔직히 다 주목해서 보지 않았습니다. 다 주목해서 보지 않고 있다가 이번에 문재인 대통령이 평양 가서 그렇게 인사를 하니까 그다음에 그 뒤에 김정은이 김책공대에서 사진 찍기 전에 결직원들한테 인사하면서 부각이 된 겁니다. 그래서 김정은이 해서 문재인 대통령이 해서 따라했다고 하면 그건 정말 아니라는 거죠. 근데 맞춰서 그렇게 보도를 할 뿐이지 사실 인사를 하는 거는 김정은이 먼저 했고 그리고 어쨌든 김정은하고 부친 김정이라고는 정치 스타일이나 이런 데서 많이 차이가 나기 때문에 김정은이 어쨌든 주민들 앞에서 인사를 하고 또 주민들한테 잘 보여주기식보다는 어느 정도 저는 진심이 담긴 그동안에 전혀 안 보다가 이제 와서 갑자기 그런 어쩌면 문재인 대통령도 그게 평소에 몸에
I hope it's going to be my time. So, actually, so I don't really want to give these predictions because I just focus on what's written or what's available to us. So, but I think the chances are very good. So, at least like on the leadership side, they treat each other with respect, which people, I come from East Asian studies, and people say respect is very important in Asia. So I think that's a good start. And in my opinion, so all the information that North Korea is changing is very, in its limits, diverse, open-minded to some change. So things can go well. We just have to nudge them in the right direction and ask the right questions, in my opinion.
Jenny, we went from Fire and Fury and Little Rocket Man to best friends forever. So what's the future hold?
Well, I like to say, I think the glass is half full, but cracked. And so you can keep adding water to it, you can still use the glass, but it could break at any minute. I think what we have now is a process that's been engineered to be very leader-driven. So you have, Kim Jong-un dealing directly with Moon Jae-in, dealing directly with Donald Trump. And I can tell you in the United States, the attitude that Donald Trump has towards Kim Jong-un is not necessarily shared at the working level. And I think what you have now is, as long as the leaders have the will to keep moving forward and see a way forward, we will keep moving forward as much as we can. And I think there's sort of an overabundance and over-optimism on the South Korean side of as long as Kim Jong-un, as long as North Korea is willing to do certain things, willing to talk about denuclearization, willing to consider certain moves on denuclearization, that everyone will want the best for them and will take them up on that offer. And I can tell you that North Korea has for a long time been willing to do these things. It's the US that has been reluctant to be willing to do things with them. and to take those corresponding measures. And I don't think, outside of Donald Trump himself, I don't think that attitude is shared among the establishment, among the administration themselves. And you see this now. I think this is why this end of war declaration has become such a controversial point, is that, Donald Trump himself seems to think it's okay. It's a political declaration. It's largely symbolic. It doesn't necessarily obligate the U.S. to anything specifically, although it will trigger more conversations about what a peace regime looks like. But the administration is very reluctant to do this without big concessions from North Korea and very tangible concessions from North Korea on the denuclearization front. And so you have kind of fundamental problems that if U.S.-DPRK relations don't make progress, a lot of the inter-Korean agenda also will hit a glass ceiling very quickly. And so I think, it is right to be optimistic, but also with some caution, because, I think we've all seen lately, as quickly as the tenor has shifted in the favor of North Korea and Kim Jong-un, it could just as quickly go back. And if you look at Donald Trump, if you look at the way that even the Pyongyang Declaration has sort of been sold by Moon Jae-in to the U.S., I think he's sort of oversold the commitments versus what North Korea is willing to do, which is a big difference. And if the U.S. goes in with the wrong understanding of what happened, you can get frustration very quickly in the process. And Donald Trump is not known for being a very understanding person, or a very kind of moderate person in response. And so I think there does become a point where if he feels frustrated, if he feels betrayed, if he feels fooled, that response could get very ugly very fast.
Well, thank you so much for that. We've run about 10 minutes over, but we started a bit late, so I think we're just about on time. We've learned a lot here. For the journalist here, you learned the importance of verification, fact-checking, approaching all sources with skepticism, the importance of finding first-hand sources if you can. Be wary of all of your informants and your sources, and also be aware of confirmation bias, of going out and finding people who just confirm the conventional wisdom out there. So all good tips for journalists who are covering North Korea. I'd like to thank our panelists here, really stellar panel we had here. I'd like to thank Ms. Choi Seon-Young, Martin Weiser, and also all the way from Washington, D.C., Jenny Town. Thank you, audience. And